John Miller takes us through the fascinating history of Qigong, starting thousands of years ago with simple movements imitating the movements of animals, to its current form of Jilin Qigong science. Not without controversy and political turmoil, this episode sheds some light into where we come from, where we are today, and where we are heading from here. My name is Thorsten Lüdecke, and this is the Wisdom Qigong podcast.
The views and opinions expressed in this episode are solely those of the individuals involved. The content is for informational purposes only and should not be taken as fact.
The history of Qigong is always a contentious one. I remember years ago, one of my first introductions was the work of Ken Cohen, and Ken Cohen points it back to the Wu of ancient China, so the shamanic practices of ancient China. There are people who say that it's back to about 4000 BC. There are people who say it's older. There are people who say it's newer. I think when we look at Qigong as a subject, we need to recognize that actually Qigong only came into existence in its current kind of form in the 1950s. Prior to this, there was a number of practices that existed.
That's a little disappointing because we keep promoting Jilin Qigong as based on thousands of years of Chinese wisdom, and now you come and say it's only been around since the 1950s.
I'm sorry. Yep, that's the case. But we're not lying. Qigong as a term has only been around since the 1950s, but the underpinning practices, whether we look at Daoyin, which is one of the older, more recognized sort of labels that was given to it, or whether we push back into prehistory, we can still see the process going through. So, if we take Ken Cohen's perspective and go, ancient shamanic practices, at this point, we find something very interesting. And the argument here is that in those times, we would imitate the movement of animals in order to achieve their abilities. So if you want to hunt more effectively, you may imitate a tiger. If you want to stalk more quietly, you may imitate a deer. And you would look at nature as an inspiration in order to help you in your survival. And then, that just makes sense.
Absolutely.
And if you look at that idea around the world, what you find is that in China, this has moved into the martial arts, it's moved into Qigong, it's moved through the spiritual traditions. If you move into Siberia, the Siberian shamanic practices have this inspiration. If you move to Central America, you can talk about the Central American practices. And Carlos Castaneda's magical passes and all of this stuff. You can see it in every country around the world. You can see this influence. I sometimes joke and say that in the UK we still have this influence, and it's called Morris dancing. It's the older. It tends to be a slightly older generation of people who turn up at pubs on a Sunday wearing bells on their ankles and hitting each other with sticks. But we can see it come through all cultures. But in China, it came through as Qigong. So then we have to say, well, what is it that turned it into Qigong in China compared to Morris dancing or other seemingly unrelated things in other cultures? And that's where I think it gets interesting, because if you look at China and you look at the way that the spiritual practices evolved, the first one that we really see documented is Taoism. So we can point back to people like Lao Tzu, and the ideas that sit within Taoism, to me, appear to be absolutely core to the ideas that sit within Jilin Qigong. To me, it's probably more of a Taoist practice than it is a Buddhist practice, although there is these references to Pang as Pang monk when he was in a Buddhist phase. And Taoism, what can I say about Taoism? It has, to me, a sense of simplicity within it. There's a piece here that is very much about the best way to describe it. The idea Yi Dao Qi Dao. So where the mind goes, the qi follows. You can see that within Buddhist practice. The concept of Hunyuan Qi comes directly from some of the ideas within Buddhism about Wuji, about non-action, about Wu Wei, there's these direct correlations. And the practice of the use of the embodied practices that you see within the shamanic traditions as they moved through Buddhism actually got an interesting hit to them, because one of the ideas within Taoism, is that you need to have a long life in order to achieve the aims within Taoism. So it's natural then for the Taoist spiritual practices to have a health aspect to it. And arguably, this is the part that's then picked up by the Yellow Emperor. By the way, if you Google the dates for the Yellow Emperor, it's massively confusing, because the Yellow Emperor's Classic appears to have been written a significant, and I mean hundreds and hundreds of years after the Yellow Emperor actually lived. So there's all kinds of bits and pieces there. But yeah, I think that initial connection between spiritual and health practice occurs around Taoism. And so we're talking, what are the dates for Lao Tzu? Off the top of my head, I'm thinking about 250 BC, something like this. So this is the first part that we really see the physical practices and the spiritual practices coming together.
Now, let me just make sure, because you mentioned Buddhism 2 or 3 times, but you meant Taoism. You corrected yourself, right?
Yeah.
So, okay, just for the listener, we were talking about Taoism here and all these things. Perfect. No worry.
Yeah.
Okay, but that's a great point you're making here. Connecting the spirituality with the health aspect.
Yeah.
So this is obviously something which is extremely present in Qigong, also because Qigong and traditional Chinese medicine go hand in hand. So let's take it from that point. We are with the Yellow Emperor at the moment, who's so often credited to be the founding father of Qigong, right?
He is, yeah, and I think there is an element of truth within it. But we also need to understand that the Yellow Emperor is in many ways a mythical character. So the Yellow Emperor's Classic, which is somewhere up there, will be the Yellow Emperor's Classic. The dates are so much later than he existed. But Chinese medicine, and I'm also going to pick up on the idea of traditional Chinese medicine versus classical Chinese medicine. Again, a lot of people think that traditional Chinese medicine is a very old system. It's not. It's the latest iteration of a very old system. So we can actually, for traditional Chinese medicine, there's an argument that it only actually occurred in 1972.
Another disappointment, John. Another disappointment.
I'm
to call
sorry,
it traditional, and then it's so recent.
I'm full of disappointment, mate. Now, again, if you look at that, and we'll just jump forward to that bit. In 1972, China was reaching out to America, and there was President Nixon had an entourage go to America, and one of his journalists, or one of the journalists covering it, had an appendicitis. And this is the first point that we really see acupuncture appearing in the Western dialogue, because he had acupuncture as the analgesic when he had the appendix operation. And it went everywhere. So that was the first point that we really see the idea of traditional Chinese medicine. But prior to this, we have something called classical Chinese medicine. And classical Chinese medicine is actually a more complex system. So when we talk about the 5 elements, and we'll see a lot of people talk about 5 elements, and the circle of the creative and the control cycle with a pentagram in the middle, and that's only one representation. Within classical, there's actually the representation with the earth element in the middle, surrounded by the 4 elements. And this, again, speaks to other ways of viewing things through Chinese medicine. And also, we'd talk about postnatal and prenatal qi within the classical more than we do within the traditional. So it's just labels. The origins of the Chinese medicine go back millennia. The origins of Qigong go back millennia. but we mustn't confuse the current terms that are used for them with where they came from. Okay, so let's jump onto Buddhism, because Buddhism is also quite an interesting one. So a lot of people will point to Bodhidharma's visit to the Shaolin Temple as being the origin of certain forms of Qigong. So you talk about the Badua Jin, the I Ching Jin, which are two very classic Qigong forms. I Ching is the muscle and tendon work. And the story that goes with it is that Bodhidharma, when he came, realized that the monks that were sitting there meditating, they were ignoring the physical being. And therefore, they weren't healthy. And they weren't doing so well, so they needed to have exercise. So again, this spiritual tradition and the need for health gets emphasized in this perspective. But we also need to recognize that over the course of history, the Chinese, let's just say the controlled landmass that China had grows and shrinks at various times. And so at certain points, it includes Tibet, it includes Korea, it includes Taiwan, it includes all of these areas. And then you can't just point at Bodhidharma, you've got to also to point at Padmasambhava, who's the founder of Tibetan Buddhism, and the influence of Tibetan Buddhism on China. And on top of that, you've also got to look at Monkey Journey to the West, this amazing folktale that's become quite well known. And I would encourage anybody who hasn't read Monkey to go and get a copy of Monkey. I'm going to just give a brief plug here.
This is a podcast. Not everybody is watching it, so you'll have to tell us what you're doing. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a version of Monkey by an author called Julia Lavelle, which is the book I'm holding up now, which is just a beautiful rendition of it.
I will put the details in the show notes, so for those that couldn't see the book now, that they can have access and get it if they are interested. Yes.
Yeah. Now, again, Monkey is a fascinating story because it kind of takes the mickey out of the Taoist traditions and the Buddhist traditions and points to all the shortcomings that sit within them, within this folktale about a monkey king. But it's called Monkey Journey to the West, and what it's also recognizing is the influence of the West, as in the west of China, so India, on the spiritual traditions of China. So there's all these bits that are all weaving through as well. So to me, this is a fascinating part of history.
Right.
And to add just one more bit into that before we come up to date and talk about Jinheng, there's some really fascinating stuff around the Daoyin exercises. So there's two main points here. One is in about 400 AD. I can't give precise dates. I'm useless at remembering dates. The government took control of Daoyin. They started to regulate the physical exercise practices. So when the Chinese government did this more recently, it isn't without precedent. It's happened before.
My name is Leila Cupido, and I'm the project manager of the Students Hub. Our team is constantly adding events, teachers, videos, and other resources to take your practice to the next level, improving the quality of your life and the life of the people around you. We do this work for you, so please use it. Hun Yuan Ling Tong.
And what's the reason at that point in time that the Chinese government thought they have to regulate the movements?
I couldn't give you precise details on that one.
All right.
One of the people that we work with, her PhD was covering this area, and I have got access to the paper, but I wouldn't like to summarize because I may get it wrong. But
okay.
But there is always a sense that these practices can have great power.
Right.
We can talk more clearly about what's happened in the more recent times than we can what happened 1600 years ago.
Of course.
Mm-hmm. But the other thing that's interesting is that the earliest recorded version or the earliest recorded Daoyin exercises look very similar to the earliest recorded yoga practices.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
But the kicker here is that the earliest recorded Daoyin practices predate the yoga practices by about 400 years.
Well, at least that's good news for our marketing here.
So
we are older than yoga.
So potentially we are the origin of yoga, which is a really weird thought.
Right.
Because the perceived wisdom is that everything came out of India. But actually, if you look at the way that the interactions occurred, there was an exchange with India. Or, you know, it's never one-way traffic in these things. There's always cross-cultural influence. So, yeah, there is potential that Qigong actually is the origin of yoga. Well, Daoyin is the origin of yoga. I think it's probably safer to say they have a common source.
Right.
Because
I can already see all the commentaries of yoga practitioners underneath our podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think by far the safest thing to say is that there are a range of related practices with a common source. And I think that if anybody is actually bold enough to stand up and say we are the original practice, they're probably worth ignoring. So yeah, there's this rich sort of history that goes through. And if you look at the dynasties in China and the way that they rose and the way that they sort of larger areas were taken in, then they shrank back. The need for, if you look at the warring states, if you look at these types of times, the need for there to be significant martial aspect within the movements, the need for the health practices to be through, this underlying spiritual thing that runs through as well. And so it's no surprise that a number of people now, when they talk about the basis of Qigong, they will talk about the combination of the martial, the medical, and the spiritual, and the influence of those on the modern day practices.
Right. So
yeah, but if we bring it right up to date, sorry, I'm just going Blair at you, so you'll have to put up with it just a little bit longer.
I love it.
So if we look at sort of 1949 onwards, becomes very interesting. So pre-1949, we have this period from, I'm going to go 1912, as I say, please don't trust me on dates, please check them, where we have the fall of the last dynasty within China, and then the rise of the communists and the nationalists, and there's all kinds of stuff going on between them. In 1949, having had the Long March in the 1930s, where Mao had retreated to the north of China, we then start to see the kind of start of the current period within China. And so at this point, there's a couple of really fascinating things that have happened. The first thing to say is about Tai Chi. Okay, now, I have quite strong views about Tai Chi. As a Qigong practitioner, I consider Tai Chi, and if you look at one of the translations as grand ultimate boxing, I don't consider it to be the health practice. I consider it to be the martial art. But I'm a Qigong practitioner, so of course, everything right up to the pure martial art looks like Qigong to me. Quite a lot of yoga looks like Qigong to me because I'm a Qigong practitioner.
Yes.
If I was a Tai Chi practitioner, I'd probably say pretty much everything up to the purest Taoist aspect is Tai Chi. So we're in murky ground. But in 1948, there's a couple of people that we have to mention at this point. One is a lady called Sophia Delzer. And Sophia Delzer was she was in Shanghai at this time, and she was introduced to Tai Chi. Now, you've got to think that there's been a lot of bad feeling about Western influence following the Opium Wars. Just have a look at the Opium Wars. You'll find out why, especially Britain came off rightfully with a very bad reputation because of them. So it's unlikely that the people who are teaching Tai Chi would teach the people who they've got such bad feeling about the secrets of their martial arts. But Sophia Delzer was a dancer. She was a choreographer, and she learnt the Tai Chi from effectively servants at their property, and then brought it back to America and taught it. So there are two dilutions that we see. One is a dancer, and the other one is not martial.
Right.
And at the same point, we have a lady called Gerda Geddes. Similar situation, brought Tai Chi back to the UK. And both are credited with being the first people to bring Tai Chi back to the West. But we need to go, what is it they actually brought back? And I think we need to ask the same questions of Qigong. When we start to see Qigong come into the West, why has it arrived and what's going on? What was the situation at the time? Now, following on from this particular piece, 1948, we then move into a period called the Great Leap Forward. So the Great Leap Forward is 1958, 1962, something like that. So this is when they start to move the whole basis of the Chinese economy. And they start to make big advances, but it also corresponds with the Great Famine. So there's great hardship as well. So there is a significant need at this point for a health practice. And this is the first point we see Qigong being used in the term, in something like the modern equivalents.
Right.
It did exist previously in the Qing dynasty, so 1600s to 1900s in some martial arts. But the first time we see it in the sort of way that we view it nowadays is in this period in the 1950s around a health practice that's being promoted by the government to support significant health issues. So this is the first point that we see Qigong.
Before that, let me just ask. So it's an illusion if we think that all the Chinese people, all those 1,000 years now, when they woke up in the morning, the first thing they would do were Qigong exercises, even though we didn't call them that way. It was not like that.
I wasn't there, I couldn't say.
Right.
It wouldn't have been called Qigong. But then if you look at some of the exercises, so for example, Tai Chi Ball. Tai Chi Ball,
Yes.
I think, is an incredible exercise. But Tai Chi Ball isn't Tai Chi Ball. Tai Chi Ball is Dragon Dao Yin. And so in Chinese mythology, the dragon is the animal that connects into heaven and earth. Does this sound familiar? Ding Tian Li Di.
Right.
And the ball that it holds isn't a ball. It's either an egg, which is the start of new life, or a pearl, which is the beauty that comes from disruption.
Hmm.
And it's the movement of this between heaven and earth. So as a purely spiritual practice, this has vast meaning and predates Tai Chi Ball, potentially by thousands of years.
Right.
Because it sits completely within Chinese mythology.
Hmm.
So to me, you're more likely to have seen Tai Chi Ball being practiced than La Chi. But then the fundamental principles that sit within La Chi are common principles. So I was talking earlier this week to a Canadian author who's writing, she's a yoga teacher and a yoga practitioner, and her big piece is around introspection and understanding the internal space. And one of the people involved in the conversation was a choreographer from Germany. And he was saying, yes, but we can't understand our internal space without understanding the space around us. And I'm sitting there going, I think you're talking about La Chi. Because this is the outside space, this is the inside space.
Yes. Hmm.
So, you know, to say that La Chi didn't exist before Pang, I think is probably, you know, we see these ideas thousands and thousands of years ago. So, and if you look at the movements that we have within, for example, Lift Chi Up, Po Chi Down and Body Mind, and then you compare those to some of the more traditional, so like the Shaolin schools of Qigong, you find massive commonality.
Hmm.
So yes, before 1950s, the Daoyin practices were probably very, very similar to what we now know as Qigong. But Qigong as a term only occurred in the 1950s.
So then let's continue there. You said, so in the 1950s, the government was looking for a way to promote health for their people. And it was a time where there were scarce resources and they couldn't come up with expensive Western medicine. And that's when they said, okay, well, Qigong is a really good idea because we know it's working. And let's take it from there, please.
Yeah. So at this point, we have a meeting of a couple of practices that form what was at that point interestingly called Qigong therapy. And that combined aspects of Taoism, of Buddhism, of a number of the traditional pieces, Chinese medicine, into the movement. But that was problematic. So during the Cultural Revolution, so Cultural Revolution is 66 to 76. I've just glanced down and checked my dates. They are correct.
Good.
What happens is that the Red Guards are very anti anything that refers back to the old style of China. So although there was this first resurgence, as it gets referred to, of Qigong in the 1950s, by the mid-60s, it's already being suppressed. There's some pretty unpleasant things happening to Qigong practitioners.
And the idea was we now have communism. It's a revolution. Anything old basically has to be we have to get rid of, and it's evil because we are building a complete new world. That's kind of if I summarize it in simple terms, that's the thought of the Chinese government at that point, right?
Yeah, and even when you come out of the end of the Cultural Revolution, the excesses that happened during that period. There's, everybody's blaming everybody else for them. But you can see that kind of fundamentalist piece coming through, going, no, that's old. We don't want it. We need to get rid of it. So then we move forward to 1972. I'm just glancing down, 79. That's the date I was looking for. I wish I could remember dates. And this is the start of what's called the Reform period. Now, in the Reform period, what happens is that China starts to go, we need to find a way to move forward. We need to find a way to reinvent ourselves economically and make ourselves successful. So they then open up 4 key economic areas in the country and invite foreign investment in. And these areas do amazing things. But unfortunately, what also happens is that the other areas in the country suffer as a result. There's also a piece here about the introduction of Western medicine and the sheer cost of Western medicine. Because opening the hospitals, I mean, the amount of funding that's needed to bring the machinery in and the equipment and everything else. Western medicine is very expensive. And we've got large areas of the country that, again, are in poverty because of the collapse of the economy outside of these 4 key financial areas. So they lean on Qigong again, and it comes back in. And it's this process, it's this cycle, it's this second resurgence that is the birthplace of Jianeng. Now, the government guideline at this point was that they needed a healthcare system, they needed a public health system that was deeply effective for people, it was accessible, and it was scientific. The things it wasn't allowed to be was spiritual.
Right. And the reason for that is?
Within the whole of communist China, there's kind of a suppression of religion. And religion and spirituality seem to go hand in hand. And there's an argument here that the spiritual leaders or the religious leaders exert too great a power over the population. We can take that however we want to, but I kind of look at that today and I have to question the leaders of the big religions. How much power do they exert over the population? And is that healthy? But this also has a slight sort of undercurrent to it, because it also means that spirituality or spiritual traditions within China, they kind of don't exist, but it's a human need. So as soon as something arrives that has the potential to be spiritual in a situation like this, people are going to jump on it and they're going to go, I can find everything I need in this. So we have Jianeng arriving, and anyone who's studied Jianeng will know Qigong science. They'll know Huajia Center. They'll know healing. These are the things that it's really famous for, which completely correspond with what was required by the government.
Right.
But you also see the rise of a movement called Falun Gong. And Falun Gong is trying to plug the same hole, but they are incorporating spirituality into it. So their incorporation of spirituality means they're also plugging the spiritual void, So they inspire tens of thousands of people. And they also, at this point, appear to be quite unscientific in the way that they're promoting health. And so this doesn't go down well with the government.
Now, Falun Gong, though, is, really, it's also a Qigong form, or it has developed out of Qigong, but it's not Qineng Qigong. I mean, it is really a separate movement, right? Let's just make that clear.
Yes, we need to say that up front. Years ago, I went into my local Chinese takeaway. And I was talking to them a little bit, and they asked me why I knew a bit about China, and I said I practice Qigong, and they said, "You're not Falun Gong, are you? If you're Falun Gong, you leave."
Right.
And I'm like, "No, I'm not Falun Gong."
Yes.
But we need to understand where they sit within it, and they start as a Qigong practice, and evolve into a spiritual movement that I think now are classifying themselves as a religious movement. But we can also see why the government, who are saying scientific, health-focused, not spiritual, would not approve of the approaches that Falun Gong were taking.
Absolutely. And, I might add, I don't have an opinion on Falun Gong. They can do whatever they want from my point of view, because I'm not the Chinese government here. So I don't have the same concerns and worries. But obviously also one of the strong points for me of Qineng Qigong is that it's not religious, that, Muslim people can do it, Christians can do it, Jews can do it, anybody can do it. I don't need a religion, or it doesn't matter if I have religion. It's in perfect coexistence with anyone. And that is, for me, part of the attraction. So I know there was a necessity when Qineng Qigong was founded to ground it on science. But it's also wonderful because it's not just, hey, let's all believe this or let's all believe that. Now, there is a scientific base to Qineng Qigong, which obviously helps a lot of people also from the mindset to say, okay, I got it. Now, this is science. That's why it's working. It's far easier for a lot of people than to trust in Qineng Qigong and to say, it's obvious that it's working. We can see it. We've got proof, and here we go. Just wanted to make that point because obviously this is a touchy thing with Falun Gong, because it had an impact on the development of Qineng Qigong, just because people don't differentiate.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm very grateful that Falun Gong is no longer considered to be Qigong, because it means that Qigong is now free to be Qigong.
Right.
And I would just completely back you up on what you've just said. It's my involvement in Qineng Qigong, and I've studied a number of styles of Qigong, but it's actually purely Qineng is my practice. And that's what's made it possible for me to work in places like the Middle East, in Islamic states. We can introduce these ideas in ways that are completely open and accessible to almost anybody. Working with scientists, working at very high levels, and some of the other stuff I've done, again, we can present in a way that is accessible and makes sense. And that's so powerful. So yeah, I completely agree on that one. And it's one of the things that we need to, it's one of the things that, if we look at what Dr. Pang did, it's one of the things that I think he did incredibly well. Because to me, Qineng is a spiritual practice, but it's not a religious practice. It has the ability for us to go very deep inside and understand our own state, but we don't need to tie it to any particular doctrine.
Right.
So yeah, getting slightly sidetracked. Okay,
let's go back to where were we exactly? 1970 something, right?
Yeah, so we're in the second resurgence, and we're in the mid-80s. And so at this point, there's a couple of narratives that we hear, and I think that we need to be cautious around these, because I think that both of them are true to an extent, but it's not really, as with anything, it's not necessarily easy to say what is the whole picture. So the first thing that we hear is that because of the Huajia Center, it appears that the Chinese government considered Qigong to be a cultural treasure. So they then produced a league table of Qigongs. Now, unsurprisingly, Qineng is at the top, not because it's the best Qigong for everybody, but because it was the one that was most accessible and most relevant and most widely proven in China in the 1990s. So, when we hear number one Qigong in China, you need to then sort of think about that one and go, right, so most relevant to 1990s China. Okay, that's what they mean. Right. Falun Gong didn't make the top 10.
Yes, not surprised. Yes.
So therefore, there was a little bit of upset. And the stories I hear is that they mobilized at least 60,000 followers to protest. Now, what I understand of...
Now, when you say they, you mean Falun Gong organized the...
Yeah.
Yes, okay.
And there was some very unpleasant things happening in Tiananmen Square around this. So I've heard reports of Falun Gong followers setting light to themselves in the same way that you see the Buddhist monks setting light to themselves in protests in other countries. There's some it isn't just they weren't top 10. There was a whole load of other stuff going on. And there was a massive movement. There were people who were completely inspired by Falun Gong who then protested. So then the government decided to take action. Now, this is where one of the other myths about Qigong comes in. A couple of the styles of Qigong that I've studied have said, oh, no, Qigong was banned because our system is too powerful. No, sorry. Qigong was banned, or certain styles of Qigong were banned because of the influence they had over large parts of the population that weren't aligned with the government. But Qigong itself was never actually banned, which again is like, hey, because I've always been taught that. What actually happened was that the government, yet again, as they did in the 4th century with Daoyin, they took control.
Right.
And they launched something that's called Health Qigong. And Health Qigong is the accepted version of Qigong, or was the accepted version of Qigong in China for many years. And interestingly, Health Qigong leans back into Badua Jin, into I Ching Jin, into Yimai, into all kinds of traditional Daoyin exercises. And it embraces the culture. And unlike what happened with the Great Leap Forward, they've completely embraced the original culture, but they've done it in a way that is acceptable, and there is research done on it. They have Qigong competitions to see who's the best person in the forms and these types of things. But Health Qigong stepped in. Now, the other thing that we hear is that when the Huajia Center closed down, a lot of the people retrained into Tui Na. Now, that didn't happen because Qigong was just banned overnight. There was a process that occurred. So, yes, Jineng Qigong was something that wasn't able to be practiced. Certainly the first time I was in China to train, it was not an acceptable practice. Subsequently, sort of 2 or 3 years later, it was an acceptable practice. Things move very quickly in China.
Yes.
But also we then see this idea of Pang, and again, lots of narrative around this that I would have to question. We hear about him. I mean, the strongest one I've heard is, oh, he was imprisoned for many years. The more general one that we hear is house arrest. Again, where the truth of this is, I don't know whether we will ever actually find out. But one of the things that is clear at this time, Pang took the agreed never to be involved with Jineng Qigong ever again. And this was reinforced to me when one of the teachers came over and he said, Pang's heard something about what I was doing with the companies at the time. And I just immediately turned around and said, but Pang's not got anything to do with Jineng Qigong. And the response was, yeah, absolutely. This isn't about Jineng Qigong. It's just like, okay, fair enough. This makes me very cynical about when we see people in China talking about Pang's latest teachings on Jineng Qigong. It feels, and I'm probably speaking out of turn here, so please feel free to shoot me down, but my sense is that because of the promises that were made, that I understood are still being kept, when we hear these claims, we have to question, where do they come from? Who are they serving? And what's going on? And again, it's that piece about, if we understand a bit of the history and the things that happen, we can see a little bit more of what's happening nowadays more clearly. So I can move forward
So,
from here if you would like.
well, yeah, I mean, I think we need to look a little bit more into what you just said, because that's also things that I hear for the first time in such clarity. Now, my understanding is that Dr. Pang is present. I'm sure he is in line, like many others that support the current government in China, Chinese people. I mean, that's just what you do in China, for better or for worse. But I hear he's talking at conferences. I hear he's around. So you might use different terms, but I cannot see that he has withdrawn completely from public life or from being a contribution in the area of health and well-being. It doesn't matter how you call it, and I'm sure he has his new insights that he's also making sure people, humanity learns about, right?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. But and again, here we hit into an interesting area. One of the universities that I've been working with is University of Wales. We don't need to go into detail about them, but they have two partner universities that they work with in China, Jiangxi and Beijing Union. Most interestingly for us in this conversation is Jiangxi. Jiangxi University, one of the associate professors is Dr. Pang. And the work that he's doing there is actually being pushed forward as medical Qigong.
Right.
So it's not Jineng Qigong, it is now medical Qigong.
Yes.
And if you study medical Qigong, if you look at medical Qigong, you'll find a lot of commonality between the things that exist within medical Qigong and Jineng Qigong. And actually, you'll find that it's kind of an open secret that medical Qigong is derived from Jineng Qigong.
Yes.
But the focus in medical Qigong is slightly different. So if we look at the studies that are being done in the universities, if we look at the way that universities in the West, so for example, University of Northumberland has done research into medical Qigong around long COVID and also around insomnia, we're seeing more and more of these things happening. And Dr. Pang is still present within this process. There's the whole question about Qigong within the academic system, I think is, again, it's a bit of a can of worms, because there are many reasons why it should be there, and there are also many reasons why it shouldn't be there. But to me, there is this core, and last time we spoke about, we mentioned what is the core of the practice. To me, one of the things that is hugely inspiring is that core of what Qigong is actually about still seems to be present within the work that Dr. Pang is doing. But it doesn't need to be classified as Jineng. It's now coming through as medical, and it gets applied into a different place.
Yes. And I think that is where the two of us meet again, because that is also my understanding. If you look at how you could argue that the original Jineng Qigong is currently practiced and really flourishes in the West. Mm-hmm. Because we don't have these agendas. We don't have that history, the political and the other ideas around that. We just see how wonderful it is. So it's currently upheld in the West by practitioners like you. I mean, you said you're focusing on your practice is Jineng Qigong, or like many of our listeners. So we are holding this up. While in China, it is a little bit that they are trying to move their way back into Jineng Qigong, using slightly different approaches, using slightly different terms, but making sure the essence and the incredible healing power of Jineng Qigong is preserved. Maybe in slightly different practices, maybe in slightly different ways that have less history around them. So it's easier to do that. But in a way, one could say, the powerful Jineng Qigong is currently practiced in the West, while in China they had to take this little detour. But it seems a lot that the officials in China are loosening up quite a bit. And as you said, things are moving fast in China. And China, one thing about China is they're an extremely intelligent country, and also their leadership is extremely intelligent. So if they see things are working well and it brings progress to the country, they're quite willing to embrace it, as long as it doesn't go into the Falun Gong way and taking a course on its own, saying, okay, guys, forget communism. We know better because we are a spiritual movement, or we are this, or we are that. So I think it is kind of reintroduced slowly and a little careful, because that's also part of the Chinese culture. You take tiny steps and see and look what's happening. But in a way, I'm also saying that the West is doing a great service to Jineng Qigong here, because we are upholding it at the moment. And we are practicing, obviously, with support from masters from China who know exactly how things work and share their knowledge and wisdom with us.
Yeah. There's a piece here that I also think is fascinating. That if we look at the need for the creation of Jineng Qigong, so we're talking about a system that was developed for the needs of China in the 1980s.
Yes.
And it's very easy to then turn around and say, well, why are the needs of China in the 1980s relevant to the West in the 2020s? And that's a question I think we should always ask ourselves, because it helps us to actually put things into some point of reference. But we've hit one of the really big ones already in the conversation. There's aspects that we approach within Jineng Qigong that are unspoken, but are very much present. And those same aspects around spirituality, around openness in this area, around healing, are as deeply relevant today in the West as they were in China in the 1990s.
Right.
But there are also aspects that were very much present within China in the 1990s that are no longer as relevant in the West in the 2020s. My understanding of Pang's teaching and my understanding of the invitation moving forward was that he wanted the practice to continue to evolve. And certainly his actions have spoken about the evolution of the practice. So my sense is that we need to recognize where it came from and also be willing to adapt and change to meet the needs that exist within the cultures that we live in, within the people that we work with. And again, it's not about dilution. It's about recognizing the core and being able to work with the core ideas.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm a little skeptical when it comes to the delusion thing, because I just know that if a lot of people are all bringing their own stuff to it, then we might just get into trouble. While we know that the fundamental practice that Dr. Pang has developed is working so well. So it's a bit, why would I change things? Now, I get your reasoning when you say some of the needs in China in the 80s are not the same that we have today. Now, at the same time, I find it difficult to see that these differences are so substantial that it would justify meddling around. Because fundamentally, where we know that Western medicine doesn't have answers to all our ailments. We know that Western medicine comes at a high price, and I'm not just talking financially here. I'm talking about there's an interference from the outside, through drugs, through operations, that obviously has so many ripple effects that are not all positives, and that might do damage in other parts of the bodies, because you're looking at problems in a very isolated way. Qigong doesn't have these things. And now we're just talking about the health part of it. The whole idea. I had a podcast yesterday, and it was all about happiness, because at the core of Qigong is also happiness. Happy mind, healthy thinking, all of that. This is so universal. It doesn't change whether it's in China, whether it's in the West, whether it's in the 80s, or whether it's today. So that's why I'm a little more, if there's a spectrum. I know you're very experimental and try one or two things a little different here. Well, I'm a little bit on the traditional side here and say, okay, let's try to stick to the original teachings as much as possible. But there's room for both schools of thinking. And as you said, it's a progressive thing. And also Dr. Pang is continuously developing new things. So it's not static. So why not adding something if you have an insight? And in particular, because really Qigong is a very open system. Yeah, the ideas are the same, but whether you do the lift you up like this or like that doesn't really matter so much if you understand the basics, right? So I'm with you on one level, and I'm a little less hesitant on another.
I think that's it's such a healthy approach. I mean, I'd like to reflect on that because all of the Chinese teachers that I've worked with have taught differently.
Yes.
So therefore, what is the origin? What is the real version? Yes. Because everyone I've worked with has spent time at the Huajia Center. They've either been on the 3-month training or the 2-year training. They've all got the same base training, but their representation of it is different. So, I think to me, what is the core is more important.
Absolutely.
And if we recognize the core and we keep reverting to the core and we allow ourselves to always come, I mean, this is the basics of the practice. Lachi is not go out and blow your mind. It's expand your awareness and then refine your awareness. It's present within the practice. But also there's some interesting, I mean, if we look at some of the practices such as the meditation stuff or the Ming Shui meditation, I think one of the things that we need to bear in mind here is that practices like this are deeply relevant to certain people at certain points on their journey through Qigong. But at other points, they can actually be a trap. It's a bit like I've heard some really relevant complaints about mindfulness being very dangerous. My own experience of Qigong is that Qigong can be very dangerous. Well, not very dangerous. It can back you down sort of blind alleys. I think that the purest nature of Qigong that you're talking about that doesn't have these side effects is really important. But we need to understand the practice that is relevant for the person at the right time.
Yes.
In order to keep that movement towards freedom and to stop people getting stuck down blind alleys, down spiritual cul-de-sacs, whatever we want to call them. So we don't end up in the sort of classic thing of every morning I practice for an hour. And you say, why do you do that? Oh, I couldn't cope with my day if I didn't do that.
Right.
So what you've done is you've just gone, I'm having a really tough time of it, but I can cope with it because of Qigong. So all Qigong is doing is keeping you trapped in a really tough time. So, there are potential side effects as well.
Great example. Yeah.
So,
but then really, if you go deep into it, it's obvious that this is totally contrary to the idea of Jin and Qigong, but we don't see it. Yeah. That's what you call the blind alley, right? We think we're doing this because that's the way we get through the day. But really what we are doing is it's in our way to change something fundamentally in the way we run our day, so that we wouldn't be in that situation in the first place, right? Yeah. So, absolutely. John, this was a pleasure to talk to you. It was a very controversial conversation. I must add a disclaimer here to our listeners. Obviously, now you and I are just two human beings expressing our ideas, our opinions. We don't say this is the truth. We don't say these are the things they are. We don't know everything. We're just putting out, our thoughts and where we are at the moment. And so we hope this was, gives people something to think about. I'm sure it's something we'll have aroused one or two emotions here with some of our listeners. But that's great. So thank you very much, John. And I hope to talk to you again soon in our little pre-conversation. More things came up that we might want to discuss one day. So thank you very much for that. And thank you for taking the time to explain all of your knowledge to us and the listeners here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
We trust you enjoyed this conversation, and we invite you to subscribe to our podcast so we can stay in touch and notify you of future episodes. We will end today's episode with the 8 verses meditation performed by Jin and Qigong teacher Katrin Hendricks. Enjoy.
Ding Wai Ji Shin Chong Ma Gong Yin Yang Bu Chi Shen Zhou Zai Gong Shen Yi Zhao Ti Zhou Shen Rong Rong Zhou Shen Rong Rong Zhou Shen Rong Rong.
To get your free ebook on the 8 Verses meditation, please check the show notes below.